I believe it's really important that we are equipping the next generation to use these tools wisely. The world uses these sometimes with nefarious purposes. We need to use them for good purposes. We just had our 13th annual event. We're going to continue to train not only filmmakers here in the US, but we have people that come from around the world that come to this event, and we're even now getting ready to expand to other countries.
Welcome to Unmasking Government Schools with Sheri Few, USPI's weekly podcast that empowers parents to reclaim their children's education from government bureaucrats and social engineers, equipping you with the tools and resources needed to join the cause.
Welcome to Unmasking Government Schools with Sheri Few. I'm your host, Sheri Few, and today I'm very happy to be joined by Phillip Telfer, a pastor and author. He's the author of a book that has an interesting title, Help, the Smartphone Ate My Family. He's the co-director and award-winning documentary film Captivated, and is the founder and director of the nonprofit ministry Media Talk 101. He's also the annual Christian Worldview Film Festival producer. So, Phillip Telfer, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Sheri. I'm glad to be on your show.
That's a long list of things that you are responsible for, and I've been to your website and viewed many of the things you've produced, and I'm just extremely impressed. You are definitely a well-rounded individual, touching on many areas of gifts that God has provided you, and being a great resource to everyone. So I'll admit, I didn't really know much about you and your work until I did the research for this interview. But I wanted to have you on because you're on the front lines of the battle for the hearts and minds of the next generation. So please tell our audience a little bit about yourself and the different projects you've been involved in.
Sure. Yes, and I've been working with parents and their children for over 20 years through my nonprofit organization, Media Talk 101, which I began to really focus originally on teens and trying to help them understand how media and entertainment and technology impacts their lives for better or for worse, and to understand that they could have a biblical worldview on how to handle these, both as a consumer of media. And then that led into why I'm doing what I do with the Christian Worldview Film Festival, because it's the other side of that coin. We need to be good discerning in as consumers of media, but we also want to be discerning as producers. And today we have so many content creators, and we want to pour into them. So those are the two main things I do on the nonprofit side. And out of that, of course, writing books, producing videos are all just part of that bigger picture. And of course, as you mentioned, my day job and night job and weekend job is I'm a pastor. But I believe that it's good to, even for pastors, to have projects outside of the local church that kind of have a global perspective. So
I wish many more did. I wish many more saw the need to utilize their gifts and impact the world in the way that you are. So I know that there are many, but I think there could be and should be many, many more. I was actually reviewing your website during my break a few minutes ago to refresh my memory of my research, and I watched a short film that you did about the Titanic, and I thought that was really good, how it tied into technology. So that's one of your Media 101 projects, right?
yes, that's right. Yeah, Media Talk 101. I've always felt that it's really good to use stories that help log into people's heads, and the Titanic was one. I actually featured a short part of that story in the documentary Captivated, Finding Freedom in a Media Captive Culture. We had to put so much stuff in that documentary that I couldn't tell as much of the story as I wanted to. So yeah, recently I went back and made a mini documentary about that, which we put up on our YouTube channel.
It was very good. I was captivated. Absolutely. It was great. So let's talk then about the problem with media, and particularly your book, that has such a catchy title. We know that we are in a media-saturated society. And, I was even looking just a little while ago at the AAP's recommendations on screen time because it has changed so much over time. And what I saw was that in 2016, the recommended screen time for children was 2 hours. And
That's correct.
the explanation was, well, they were trying to get kids away from the television, but technology has evolved so much since that time. They don't even have time limits any longer that they recommend. It's just some kind of vague guidance about the type of quality of content and that kind of thing. So let's jump right in about this and tell me what some of the greatest challenges are that parents face in this screen saturated environment.
Sure. Well, one of the greatest challenges is that we do not have any ancestral wisdom as parents. Like I raised four children. My youngest is now 19, so we've been through raising kids in the digital age, and I couldn't go to my parents, even though they live right on our property. They live a stone's throw away from me in their house, but I couldn't go to them and say, "Mom and Dad, how did you handle social media when we were teens?" Like, well, Philip, you didn't have social media when you were a teen. Okay, well, how did you handle smartphones? And they can't help me with that because they didn't have to navigate that. They had to navigate their own issues. So parents today, that's the biggest challenge. We're facing something that's unprecedented in world history. And with that, these wonderful technologies, which are great, they can have like great positive impact. But you put these powerful technologies in the hands of children who don't know how to handle them well, then I just produced it's not out yet, but I produced a short film video about like what age should a child have a cell phone or a smartphone, and it's just a 1 minute YouTube short. But the answer to that is like it's the wrong question. The question is what age do you want your child to have the internet in their pocket with them all the time? What age do you want them to carry the drama with them of social media and predators and access to pornography? And like, what age do you want childhood to stop? What age are you wanting their attention span to be impacted by constant scrolling? What age do you want the communication in your household to break down and to be destroyed by notifications, or to stop altogether because of this? Because those are the things that are actually happening. You mentioned the statistics of the past, or the recommendation of 2 hours. Well, today the average time children spend on a screen for entertainment media. This isn't for school or productive type of things. It's for entertainment media. Between 8 and 18 years old is 8 hours a day. So as we talk about the problems parents are facing, and it's not the television any longer, which was a little bit more easier to control than a device that fits so conveniently in your pocket and has like 24/7 access to the world's greatest collection of movies, games, pornography, 24/7 connection to friends, all oftentimes sponsored by mom and dad. So yeah, we're facing an incredible challenge, and that's why I wrote the book, to help give some guidance.
That's great. I've had that discussion with previous interviews that I've done, and I like to tell people what I did with my children. So my children are, the oldest is 40, the youngest is 33, I think. And so what I did with my children was I told them when they were driving, they could get a phone because they would need a phone if they had a problem. And phones were very prevalent at that time. Everybody had a phone. In fact, one of my children told me, "Well, Mom, everybody has a phone." I said, "Well, then, if you need to get a hold of me, you won't have any trouble doing that. You can just borrow somebody's phone." So, that was my rule many years ago. And I also had a strict rule on when they could drive. So that kind of fit with my narrative because they couldn't drive until they were 18. I think by the time the youngest got his license, I might have backed off to 16, but still much older than most parents were in those days. So I think I love that you flipped the question and said, yes, at what age do you want them to have access to all of that information, the distractions, all of the headaches that come along with constant scrolling. So, um, one of the things I think also that I've witnessed and observed, and I'm sure you would agree, is that when you go out publicly, especially to a restaurant, and you look around and you'll see couples, and they're both on their phone, they're not talking, they're just totally scrolling. We actually went out to dinner last night and it looked like a father and maybe a young adult son. And I don't believe they said two words the whole time they ate. They were both scrolling their phones. So it's
Yeah, yeah.
definitely
So
an
we're not.
obsession,
It's not a teen problem. It's not a.
right?
It's not a. It's a societal challenge. And so when you think about adults who have a hard time with self-control when it comes to a pocket-sized computer that connects you to the internet all the time, how what were we thinking, or what are we thinking if we're putting that kind of technology into the hands of a child and expecting them to be able to handle that well? They're not able to handle it well, and all the research is showing that out. Because especially the more teens spend on social media today, uh, the research has shown that as the trend goes upward, so does anxiety and depression and suicide. It's a difficult and dangerous world, and I really, in writing the book "Help the Smartphone Ate My Family," it's meant to be. Even the title is a little bit winsome. It's based on well, I kind of had the idea when there's an old film in the 1984 Gremlins, which
I
I,
remember
I grew up
Gremlins.
with. I'm not recommending the film, but
Yeah.
it was labeled as a comedy horror, and it was little puppet monsters. But at the beginning, it's this cute little cuddly strange creature, and it's given to a child by a father. And so the father gives his son Billy this little creature, and it comes with three rules. And if you break the three rules, something bad is going to happen. They don't know what bad is going to happen, but and I think about that, and many families have allowed their children, they've gifted them with a smartphone. Unfortunately, many of those don't have any rules. You know, they the parents aren't thinking through, wow, what do I need to know about this before I even make this step? And so there's no rules, and all of a sudden that what seemed to be something beneficial becomes a little monster. And it's not just the phone being changed, it's the children being changed through their interaction with this phone. And I like to tell people that the smartphone is mostly tame when it doesn't have a user, because you can do this test at home. You can take your phone, take all your family's phones, and you can put them in the middle of a table and leave them there for 24 hours and come and check them the next day, and they won't have gotten into trouble. They won't have taken anybody hostage, held anybody for ransom, burned the house down. The phones will just be sitting there. They require users. But if you did that same experiment with 5 kittens or 2 puppies or 1 toddler, you know, you have a whole different situation on your hand. So the phones are mostly tame, not entirely, but they're mostly tame. The problem we're facing is we don't have the skills right now, the parenting skills, to know how to navigate it.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, and, I love the title of that book, and now I see the connection with the film, The Gremlins. I do remember that movie. So tell us why it's important for parents to recognize the signs of media overuse in their homes, and what can they do about it?
Yeah. So it's important because, once again, going back to childhood, I had enough problems growing up as a teen in the 80s with the challenges that we faced. And but looking back now, I think I am so glad I didn't have a smartphone. I'm so glad I didn't have the internet. I was getting into enough trouble as it was without those. So I believe that parents need to stop and think. And again, going back to that question, well, what's a good age for them to have a smartphone? Well, again, the question is don't ask. The better question is what is that smartphone going to take from them? Because it's not just the 8 hours of time that's spent scrolling, it's that 8 hours that's lost on something better they could have done. So I've always encouraged parents, don't just take things away, but trade up. Trade up for doing something better with that time. But it's going to cost parents more time, money, and energy to do that. And so for a lot of times we're just defaulting to the phone because it's convenient. It's like the electronic babysitter on steroids. But if you are going to replace that with something that's actually better for your children, activities. I'll give you an example in our lives. This is just a an illustration. It's not that it would fit every family, but when my son turned 11 years old, I knew he's like, oh, he's almost 12. I need to invest more time into his life and fill that time with positive things. So we started a venture in woodworking together. And so I began building out a wood shop. We watched videos, we read books, we got some training, and we did something together. What I didn't realize at the time was my daughters would all get interested. They're like leaning in, like, "Well, could you teach me that too?" So it kind of became what Dad did with my kids all through their teenage years. Eventually, by the time uh, within a few years, they were making products that they could sell. We went to a farmer's market every Saturday for 10 years. As they sold their wares, Dad would be in the shop with them. And all that was intentional. And that's what it comes down to. You have to be intentional. I'm already thinking, I don't want them glued to electronic devices. I want them doing something better with their time, but they're not going to do that without guidance. They're not going to just automatically know. But you don't have to teach. This was one of the challenges with even babies and television, was that you don't have to teach a toddler to watch TV. And in fact, when I interviewed Dr. Dimitri Christakis in my documentary Captivated, he was at the Seattle Children's Research Hospital, and he asked me off screen. He says, "Philip, do you know what age a child in America begins watching television?" And I said, "No, I don't know." He says, "Well, it's 4 months old." And then he asked me, "Why is it not 3 months? Why is it 4 months? Why isn't it not earlier?" And I said, "I don't know." He says, "Well, it's because that's when they can sit up." He says, so as soon as a child begins to sit up, you can put them in front of a screen and they'll be glued to it, because it's not because they have this great attention, because there's different types of attention. So there's not just one, and that's reactive attention. It's not focused attention. Focused attention has to be trained in children. So you don't have to train a 4 month old, and we can recognize this as adults. Like if you're at a restaurant and they've got screens, unfortunately there's like screens everywhere. You can hardly go to a restaurant without a screen being on the wall, and there could be something on that screen that you don't even care about, but your eyes are going to constantly go to it anyway. You're going to be distracted by it. That's reactive attention. And that's what a lot of the media is appealing to. So, again, there are some positive things a parent can do. One of the things in the book, the book is almost entirely practical tips for taming tech. Like I've got a whole chapter called Tips for Taming Tech, and I go through several things. I'll give an example of one of those. It's just a simple habit of prioritizing presence. So just saying, like, when we're together, when we're in each other's presence, let's keep the devices away and let's focus on real person interaction. And that leads to one of those other tips, which is like phone-free zones. That might be dinner time, around the table, no phones allowed. Let's have some time where we have the quiet and we can have conversation. And even if we have to get used to it and kind of lean into it, we can get there, but we got to start somewhere. In fact, I come across a new term a couple years ago called phubbing, which is a mashup of phone and snubbing. And it's when you are in the presence, particularly parents in the presence of their children, and the parents are distracted with the phone and notifications, and the child can't even get the parents' attention because the parents are constantly distracted. So they've referred to this now as phubbing your children. And so, yeah, and that's one of the other positive things we need to begin. It's one of my tips for taming tech, is that we do need to become better role models for our children, because the old saying, more is caught than taught. So they're watching mom and dad. They're seeing how and if we're not handling it well, then we shouldn't be surprised that we're frustrated in how they're handling these tools. So those are some examples.
That's great. And you're absolutely right. So we've got a lot more to talk about, but right now we need to take a short break. And when I come back, I'd like to go into more detail about the practical solutions you outline in your book. So don't go away. I'll be back with my interview with Phillip Telfer right after this.
Today's episode is brought to you by U.S. parents involved in education. U.S. PI's mission is to empower parents and local communities to break free from federal and national influences, thereby reclaiming parental authority over their children's education. For more insights from U.S. parents involved in education, connect with us at US PI on X and Facebook. To join the movement, visit uspi.org.
Welcome back to Unmasking Government Schools with Sheri Few. I'm your host, Sheri Few, and with me today is Phillip Telfer, founder and director of Media Talk 101 and author of Help, the Smartphone Ate My Family. So in your book, you talk a lot about, taming technology, which is what we just talked about before the break. But as you were talking about that, I again thought about what I saw at the restaurant last night. It's so funny. Because you talked about how, the technology has basically become a babysitter for children. And I know it's so convenient for parents. And I can even imagine when you talked about a 4-month-old, I can see a parent propping the kid up in front of the television so they can get something done. I believe I was guilty of that when my children were very young. And so, yes, that it draws their attention immediately. And I also thought about my grandchildren who don't watch much television, and their parents have warned me, when they come over to spend time with us, that, because their papa likes to watch television and they're not even familiar with commercials. So he would be watching football, which, I think is pretty tame, innocent for the children. And a commercial would come on and they would be glued. They weren't interested in football, but boy, that commercial got their attention. So I had to warn him about that. So it is kind of sad. And what I witnessed in the restaurant, this child was in a booster seat, couldn't have been more than 2 years old, and they had their phone set up in front of them, and I could see it was some kind of little baby video or something the child was watching. And every time it would stop, the baby would cry. I mean, just like scream. It wasn't like cry because I'm hurt, but mad because it stopped. And they would turn it right back on. So the entire meal, the child was focused on the phone, and they would keep putting food in front of him. And if the phone stopped, he screamed. I mean, it's just that bad.
Yeah. So you were asking before the break about some of those practical things. And one thing that can be really, I share this in the book, but I'll give it to your listeners because it's something you can remember easily. And I use the acronym GRACE because, who doesn't need a little more grace when it comes to raising children? So I think that's an easy acronym. And G stands for guardrails. And those guardrails can be digital, like tools. They could be as simple as turning off the internet at night. It could be filters and monitoring type of software. Those guardrails could also be like my children. You mentioned how you kept yours from having phones until they're 18. That was my oldest daughter. And in my book, I actually talk about the 4 experiments I did with my kids, and they all survived. I survived, but we tried different things. One of them was they actually do have new phones today, and I'm a big fan of the Gab phone, which my daughter used for a couple of years, my youngest one. It looks like a smartphone, but it doesn't connect to the internet. And so if you're concerned about a child driving and having a way to connect, they can text, they can call on the phone, and it even has a GPS, so you can kind of keep track of their location. But it doesn't connect to the internet, doesn't have social media, and so those are technology solutions. So that's G for guardrails, just providing guardrails. R in this acronym GRACE stands for rules, and this is just good old-fashioned parenting. You have rules, and you just say, this is what's allowed, this is what's not allowed. And ideally, you set up those rules before you give them access to technology. Just like before they get to drive a car, They have to prove that they understand the rules of the road, and they have to do a written test. When my youngest daughter, when she was 16, after using a Gab phone for a couple of years, which didn't connect to the internet for most of the time, it just sat on the counter because it didn't do anything. And but at 16, because she was running her, helping run the family business, the side business, the woodworking, and she came to me. My 16-year-old daughter brought me a 2-page document of rules that she would follow if I would allow her to get a smartphone. And but that's because I was a proactive parent. She knew there's
Mhm.
no way, Dad. I know Dad's rules. There's no way he's going to say yes unless I'm going to agree. And so after I looked at the document, I was really impressed with it. I said I scratched one thing off and I added one thing to it. And the one thing I added is, yeah, yes, you're going to pay for it. You're going to follow all these rules. But if anything goes sideways, as the father of this house, as your father, as the head of this house, I'm going to have the right to confiscate that phone, even if you paid for it. And that's my right to do as a dad because I love you. So, but again, going back to the grace, those are rules, and every household needs to have rules. The A is awareness. And those are conversations that we need to have to explain the rules and the guardrails. You shouldn't just put the guardrails up, make rules without having age appropriate conversations with your children about why you do it. Now, those conversations need to be continuing, which is the C in GRACE in the acronym. Those conversations need to continue. It's not just a once and done. This is like as they get older, especially as they get teenage years, you need to talk to them about sexting. You need to talk to them about the dangers of the dark side. I've got a whole chapter several chapters in the book called The Dark Side of Screen Time. And for parents, it's not for kids, but parents need to know these things. They need to know about sextortion and what's happening today and the problems with pornography. And so those are things that you don't have conversations with your young children, but as they get older, like when parents say, well, what age should they have a smartphone? Well, what age do you want to start having these conversations with them? Because you can't hand them that phone and not talk about sexting, sextortion, pornography, strangers, all sorts of things, predators. That's what you're allowing them to be exposed to. So you got to have those conversations. And then last, the E in GRACE is what I call escape routes. It's really important for children to know that it's safe, the safest place to come to when they're in trouble. Let's just say all the other 4 things failed, and that happens sometimes. Maybe the child skirted around all those and then found themselves in a bind. Maybe they're being sextorted by some, criminal gang from overseas, which is happening. You don't want them to feel like there's no way out other than suicide, which is happening for some kids. They don't have an escape route. They don't know that you are safe going to mom and dad and knowing that we will do everything we can to protect you and to help you get through this, and you're not alone. So those are really important. So yeah, that's just one example. But again, the whole book is mostly action steps. It's called a parent's guide to, parent survival guide for the digital age. And so the entire book is just like, hey, here's some tips and tricks and helpful things to think about when it comes to the digital age and parenting.
Well, that's a great example and great tips, and that's what parents need. And I like the fact that your approach is not banning use altogether, but incorporating it into the family in a safe way. So, how can parents do that? Protect their kids, knowing that technology. I mean, we're living in an age of technology, and that's really what the American Academy of Pediatrics is saying in their new guidelines. Is that we are definitely in an age where it can't be avoided. So knowing how to use it in a productive way, in a healthy way. What else do you recommend to parents about that, especially as it relates to artificial intelligence, which is now big on the scene?
Yes. Yeah. And so what I tell parents is, first of all, we are trailblazers. And both grandparents and parents today are all blazing a new trail because we're facing something unprecedented. And so what I encourage parents to do is to approach all these technologies not with a like we're going to say no to all technology. We're going to be mindful about it. We're going to be thoughtful and use wisdom. And so I use the analogy in the book of driver's ed. So you wanted your kids to drive eventually. You want them they need a car. They need to know how to drive and to be able to manage a vehicle on the roads to function in this world. Likewise, they need to know how to handle the digital tools today, but there's a time and place for it, and there's a process. And so I have a whole chapter that just likens the process of acclimating children to use media and technology wisely in the same way we do that to help them learn to drive and be safe drivers. And when it comes to AI, the biggest challenge right now is that AI is not a ubiquitous subject. It's so if we're talking about kids finding relational connection to chatbots, that's a huge problem. And versus also the problem with kids not going through the process, the learning process, and defaulting to just retrieving information from AI to answer a test. That's a problem. But that's been an ongoing problem already in education today, because I know that's what you do. So this is, you're in kind of an education focused organization, and for the longest time, since we've had the internet and now kids accessing the internet in the classroom, whether it's in government school, private school, or even homeschool, you have the ability to just become information retrievers. Like I can go to Google and I can get the information, or I can go to ChatGPT and I can get the information. Well, what that does is it bypasses the essential learning process of what it takes to actually be a learner, and to grow our understanding and our wisdom and our knowledge base. And so we are at a very desperate crossroads right now for this next generation of whether they're going to even learn the tools of what it means to learn, what it means to develop. And I think there's a call to go back to some of the old school methods, more reading books, read more books, and tangible books, more writing. I read an article this week in the newspaper about how the AI has become such a problem in universities that there was one college professor who is now requiring oral examinations.
Mm.
So they're making the students get up and you tell me now, what do you know about this? And that's
It
great,
is great.
But again, we're just facing this is just a whole, new jungle that we're trying to navigate through.
Yes, you're right. And it I was reflecting on what you said, thinking about um the brains, you're not taking the opportunity to figure things out, to actually learn, to rather than you're just looking it up with AI. And so there was a recent study that I read, and they published the results early, even before it went through the peer reviewed process. It was by a neurologist who did studies on AI, and it was alarming that, well, I actually knew some of this research because of brain research that we had done in a field that I was involved with several decades ago. But we knew that there are synapses in the brain that when they're not used, they die off. And those connections are made very young. It happens at very early in the process of brain development, and then reoccurs a little later, before, say, the teenage years. And so what happens if the child is using AI for their schoolwork or any kind of research, they're not utilizing their full brain capacity, and some of the synapses die off. So it actually even affects cognitive development of the brain, and a brain will not become as intelligent and smart as it can be when it's lazy and depends on AI.
Yeah. People forget that AI is artificial intelligence. That intelligence is the cumulative intelligence of humans who had to learn how to think and process and use those parts of the brain. And now we have machines that can gather all of that intelligence, but we can't bypass the need to exercise our brain. What the brain does a lot of, the brain gets good at, like what you're mentioning is synaptic pruning. But the opposite can happen, and that is to make new neural connections through the struggle of learning. I'm trying to learn a new language right now at the age of 53. It's a struggle, but there's various reasons I'm doing it, but one of them is to exercise my brain. My children, who all tended towards the creative side of the brain, they're all very artsy, and so they really struggled with math. And I didn't want to tell them at the time, like, you're doing math at more than I was required to do in government school. I didn't want to tell them that, but we had a lot of tears over math, and I would try to explain to them, look, you may not ever use this math in real life, but that's not the point. Your brain needs you to practice working through problems, and you will use that every day of your life. And this math is going to help you do that. So we're, too often it's just looking for the shortcut, but that shortcut, if it leads into a big hole where your children are stuck, that's not a good shortcut. So there is an established path for learning. We ought to kind of go back to uncover some of those old paths. The research shows that the more that kids are relying on digital tools, they're not getting smarter. And so I'm a big advocate again for going back to some old school methods of education.
Yes, it seems like there was a clip that I saw too on social media of a neurologist named Dr. Horvath recently testified. It was on C-SPAN, and he said that the Gen Z generation was the first generation that wasn't smarter than the previous generation, and he blamed it on AI and technology, and he said that their cognitive development was just slower. And so, yeah, it's good to see that there's some scientific evidence that's coming out that we can use to push these points home to parents and even as adults. Because I loved what you said that you're taking a foreign language not just to learn the language, but to also exercise your brain. And I think as adults, we love AI and go to it way too often, and probably shouldn't be doing that. So you've prompted me to think a little on that as well. So adults need to think about exercising their brain also, because we don't want to end up like so many of us have seen our parents, being 75 years old with severe dementia and all of that. I've witnessed it with my father. And then with my mother, she worked until she was like 86 years old, and she went to the gym on the way to work every day, and she was in perfect health, didn't take any medicines, sharp as a tack. It's because she kept exercising her body muscles and her brain, of course, which is also a muscle. So that's good stuff too. All right, well, we're going to change gears for a minute, and I'd like for you to talk to us a little bit about the Christian Worldview Film Festival. So it sounds like an amazing effort. I've viewed a little bit of it on your website, and you started something called the Filmmakers Guild. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes. So in 2014, I launched the Christian Worldview Filmmakers Guild and Film Festival, and it's a week-long conference. And the first part of that, the Guild, is to train a next generation of Christian filmmakers. So I gather probably 20 or 30 experts in various skill sets for filmmaking, and we bring them in and have them teach classes over the course of those 3 days. We also bring in people who can speak about worldview and just the spiritual formation of a filmmaker. And so we do that. And then we attach at the end of that a film festival where it's distinctly independent Christian films that are being submitted and curated, and we give out some awards. But I believe it's really important that we are equipping the next generation to use these tools wisely. And they're not going away. The world uses these sometimes with nefarious purposes. We need to use them for good purposes, just like you're using with this podcast. And so, yeah, that's where we've been doing that since 2014. We just had our 13th annual event, and we're going to continue to train not only filmmakers here in the U.S., but we have people that come from around the world that come to this event, and we're even now getting ready to expand to other countries to do this elsewhere.
That's great. It's really wonderful. It's good to see how you've used your God-given gifts to pull together all of these different things that benefit our culture and for young people, the Christian worldview incorporated. It's really wonderful. So we need to take another short break, but when we come back, I'd like to ask you two questions we ask all our guests before closing the show. So don't go away. I'll be back with Phillip Telfer right after this. U.S. Parents Involved in Education recently published a report titled, "Are Government Schools Redeemable?" Although it concludes that schools are irredeemable in their current state, the report offers thoughtful suggestions for beginning the long, challenging process of improving government schools. It also highlights the importance of maintaining a strong and independent alternative education system in the free market. State and national leaders who want to encourage government schools to improve should carefully consider USPI's recommendations. Elected officials must resist the urge to control education from afar and return authority to parents. When parental control is restored, education can begin to reflect the values and needs of families, which ultimately will help all children thrive. To join our movement, visit USPI.org and connect with us at USPI on Facebook and X. Welcome back to Unmasking Government Schools with Sheri Few. I'm your host, Sheri Few, and with me today is Phillip Telfer, founder and director of Media Talk 101 and the annual Christian Worldview Film Festival. So, Phillip, we close our show with two questions. What concerns you most about what's happening in education today, and what gives you hope?
Well, those are big questions. I have a lot, so I'll have to really be concise. One of the things that concerns me most really today goes back to when I was in government school, over 30 years ago. And even then, looking back, the agenda was to drive a wedge between children and their parents. My parents really worked hard to raise us in a strong Christian home, build a good biblical worldview, and my parents did a lot of things right. But much of what they were doing and teaching in the home was being undermined, intentionally undermined, in the government school. And it's not lost on me. It's one of the things that motivated me when we began parenting to find an alternative way to educate our children. And so that's one of the great concerns. But I would say secondarily, the adoption of all the digital tools, phones in school, iPads, laptops, that is a deep concern for me when it comes to education today, especially in the government schools. For one, the research has proven that it's not helping. It's not elevating education. And so because of my work with Media Talk 101, that digital component is a issue for me when I think about the schools. Now, the second question was like, what am I most hopeful about? Is that correct?
Yeah, what gives you hope?
Yeah, what gives me hope is that we live in the greatest country in the world, in my opinion. And we have a tremendous amount of freedom still if we can keep them. And we need to keep them. And we need to work hard to preserve. We're stewards of a great country. And so we have options that other people don't have around the world. You can do private schools, you can do private Christian schools, you can homeschool your children. You don't have to just hand them over to the state to be indoctrinated in things that are turning them against their parents, against the faith of their forefathers, or even their own families, against biblical truth. And so that gives me a lot of hope that homeschooling is growing around the country. It's legal. That's wonderful. That's not the case in other countries. So that hope is really centered on the privilege of being a citizen of the United States of America. But I do think about those who don't have those freedoms around the world, and my hope would extend to them that they could also experience those freedoms in the future. So when you have freedoms, there's a couple things that are important. One is to be grateful for what you have, but also then to be a good steward of it, to protect it. And so we shouldn't squander these freedoms, and we should make the most of them.
Amen. Amen. Very well said. And, when you talked about, you encapsulated our concerns about the government schools so well. And you were talking about how they turn kids against things. Well, the two things that they also turn kids against is each other today with the Marxist theories. It's an intentional agenda to pit people groups against one another. And they also are turning them against our country. So I know that you understand, because you articulated it so well, how we have to be good stewards of what we have. And so I hope that your message in this podcast and several that we do are going to resonate with parents, so that they will open their minds and understand that their children are being harmed in government schools, and they have to look for alternatives. But that's a subject for another day. So before we close, I'd like for you to tell our audience where they can connect with you and support your work.
Yes, the main place to find us is mediatalk101.org. And that can connect you to quite a few things. And then also our YouTube channel, which is at Media Talk 101. And a lot of our video content we just put up there to be beneficial. A lot of the content in the book, I'm producing videos to convey that. If you like to watch rather than read, I still encourage you to read the book. So, but yeah, visit MediaTalk101.org.
Great. That's wonderful. Great resources. And we, of course, would be thrilled if you'll come back and join us maybe several months from now, and maybe we can talk a little more about education and homeschooling. We'd love to have you back.
I would love that.
Okay.
I would love that.
Very good. So thanks again for being on the show. And to our listeners, if you found today's discussion eye-opening, please share this episode with a friend, give us a 5-star rating, and subscribe to stay informed. You can connect with us on Facebook and X at USPI, and visit uspie.org to join the movement. Until next time, I'm Sheri Few. Thank you for your support of USPI and our efforts to unmask government schools.
U.S. Parents Involved in Education is a nonprofit coalition dedicated to restoring local control of education and parental authority. By empowering parents to reclaim responsibility for their children's learning and encouraging states to move away from federal influence, USPI seeks to create a culture where parents are the primary decision makers in education and schools support families without the burden of federal mandates. If you want to start a state or regional USPI chapter in your area, please visit uspie.org and complete the brief questionnaire in the chapter section.